The moment I stepped into the foyer of St. Paul's Community Church, dressed in the navy blue dress Mom always said made me look dignified, I already felt the cold stares. Not from strangers, from my own brothers. Mark stood near the altar, checking something on his phone, his expensive suit perfectly tailored to his athletic frame. Stephen hovered by the guest book, whispering to the usher, his wedding ring catching the light as he gestured emphatically. When I walked toward them, I overheard it crystal clear. "Her name's not on the list," Stephen said under his breath. "Good," Mark replied, smirking. "She doesn't deserve to be." It felt like a punch to the chest. I froze mid-step, my hand clutching my small black purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. Not on the list? At my mother's funeral? The woman I had taken care of for the last 7 years, the one I had held in my arms as she took her final breath? I took a deep breath, willing myself not to cry. Not here, not now. The church smelled of lilies and polished wood, scents that would forever remind me of this betrayal. I glanced around at the faces, cousins, neighbors, Mom's bridge club friends, all here to say goodbye to Elaine Monroe, my mother. The woman who had raised me, who had called me every day until she got sick, who had eventually needed me to do everything for her. Still, I held my head high and entered the chapel. The pews were nearly full with dark-suited mourners and women dabbing at their eyes with tissues. But not a single seat was saved for me. No one from our family even acknowledged me. I sat alone in the very last row, the wood hard and unforgiving beneath me. The service began. The pastor spoke of Mom's kindness, her volunteer work at the hospital before her illness, her famous apple pies at the church bake sales. Photos of her flashed across a screen near the altar: Mom at Mark's college graduation, Mom at Stephen's wedding, Mom holding Stephen's first child. There were no photos of me with her. Not a single one. I watched my brothers sitting in the front row, their wives beside them, their children quiet and solemn. The perfect family portrait. And here I was, the outsider, the one who had given up everything to be by Mom's side when she needed someone most. Elaine was survived by her 2 sons, Mark and Stephen, and her 5 grandchildren, the pastor said, his voice echoing through the church. I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. 2 sons? What about her daughter? What about me? Rachel Monroe, the one who had cleaned her wounds, fed her, held her hand at night. The one who had moved back to Salem and become her full-time caregiver. I gave up my job in Seattle, my apartment, my personal life. I gave her everything. While my brothers sent birthday texts and posted old photos on Facebook, I sat with her through chemo. I learned to change IV bags. I read to her when her eyes grew too tired to focus on the pages she loved. The service continued, a blur of hymns and eulogies. Mark spoke, his voice breaking at all the right moments. Stephen read a poem about mothers being angels. Neither mentioned me or the years I'd spent caring for Mom. According to them, they were the devoted sons who had done everything for their beloved mother. But just as the pastor prepared to give the closing words, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church creaked open. A man in a charcoal gray suit walked in, briefcase in hand, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his expression solemn but determined. Mr. Greg Hollister, my mother's longtime notary. "Excuse me," he said loudly, his voice carrying through the hushed sanctuary. "Before we conclude, I've been instructed by the deceased to read the will publicly as per her explicit request." Mark and Stephen turned in their seats, their faces a matching pair of shock and indignation. I saw their smug smiles vanish, replaced by tight-lipped concern. "This is hardly the time or place," Mark started, rising from his seat. "We can arrange a proper reading after—" "Mrs. Monroe was very specific," Mr. Hollister interrupted, his voice firm. "The will is to be read here today, immediately following the service. She felt it was important that everyone hear her final wishes directly." The congregation stirred, whispers rippling through the pews. This wasn't standard practice, and everyone knew it. Public will readings were something from movies, not real life in Salem, Oregon. But Mom had always had a flair for the dramatic when it mattered. I sat straighter in my seat, something like hope flickering in my chest for the first time that day. Mom and I had talked about her will once, briefly, when she was still lucid enough to make decisions. She had squeezed my hand and told me not to worry, that everything would be clear in the end. I had assumed she meant spiritually, not legally. What happened next left the entire room frozen in silence and forced my brothers to finally face the truth about who I was. And who our mother really valued. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 47 years old. And until that day, I truly believed that being a good daughter, The right kind of daughter would be enough. But I was wrong. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the only girl among 3 siblings. While Mark and Stephen were loud, athletic, and adored by our parents, I was the bookworm, the caregiver, the one who never shined in the ways they did. I was the daughter who helped Mom in the kitchen while my brothers played catch with Dad in the backyard. I was the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries when everyone else forgot. Our childhood home in Salem was a modest 2-story with a wraparound porch and a massive oak tree in the front yard. Dad had built a swing on that tree that still hung there, even now. I could see it from Mom's bedroom window, where I'd spent most of the last 7 years. After Dad passed away suddenly of a heart attack 12 years ago, I stayed close to Mom. While my brothers moved on with their lives, Mark to Portland with his investment firm, Stephen to Bend with his growing family, I remained just an hour away in Seattle. I helped with groceries, drove her to appointments, called her every Sunday without fail. When her health declined after her cancer diagnosis, I moved back to Salem and became her full-time caregiver. At first, it was supposed to be temporary. Just until she's back on her feet, I told my boss at the architectural firm where I'd worked for 15 years. They held my position for 6 months before reluctantly replacing me. By then, Mom's condition had worsened, and leaving wasn't an option. I gave up my rental in the Queen Anne neighborhood with its view of the Space Needle. I gave up my book club, my weekend hikes, my dating life such as it was for a middle-aged, never-married woman. I gave her everything. While my brothers sent flowers on Mother's Day and called on holidays, I administered medications, scheduled doctor's appointments, and held her hair back when she vomited after treatments. And yet, they were the golden children. Every family gathering, every conversation, it was Mark and Stephen this, Mark and Stephen that. They built startups, bought houses, had picture-perfect families. Mark's oldest was at Stanford now. Stephen's twins were high school soccer stars. Their Christmas cards showed smiling families in coordinated outfits, standing in front of their beautiful homes. Meanwhile, I was just Rachel who stayed. Rachel who never married. Rachel who gave up her career. Rachel who wore the same 3 sweaters on rotation because who had time for shopping when there were medications to track and appointments to keep? I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for credit. I just wanted Mom to be okay. You always were my rock, she would say on good days, when the pain medication was working but hadn't made her too drowsy. On bad days, when the cancer and the treatments made her confused, she sometimes called me by her sister's name, or asked for Dad. Once, near the end, she looked at me with clarity and said, "I'm sorry you gave up so much for me, Rachel." I didn't give up anything, I lied, holding her frail hand in mine. I gained time with you. But over time, the calls from my brothers became colder. They criticized my choices, told me I was controlling Mom, isolating her from the family. They accused me of manipulating her, just because I was with her every day. "She needs to see her grandchildren more," Stephen would say on his monthly calls. "You're keeping her all to yourself." "You're not a trained nurse," Mark would remind me. "Maybe we should look into a facility. As if Mom was a problem to be handled, not a person to be loved. They never saw how she clung to me when the pain was bad. They never heard her beg, "Please don't let them put me in a home, Rachel." They never witnessed her dignity slipping away with each new indignity her failing body subjected her to. Indignities I helped her through with as much grace as I could muster. And then, the worst day came. Mom died. Peacefully in my arms while I read to her from Pride and Prejudice, her favorite book, I called my brothers. Told them. They said they'd handle the funeral arrangements, but when I arrived, it was like I was a ghost, a stranger in my own family. Now, as Mr. Hollister opened his briefcase at my mother's funeral, I realized that maybe, just maybe, Mom had seen more than I'd given her credit for. Maybe she had noticed the silent sacrifices, the lonely nights, the dreams deferred. Maybe. In her final act, she was about to speak for me when I had been too tired, too loyal, too afraid to speak for myself. Mr. Hollister opened the briefcase slowly and removed a stack of neatly typed papers, stamped and notarized. The church was silent now, every eye focused on this unexpected development. I could see the rigid set of Mark's shoulders from the back, the way Stephen's hand gripped the pew in front of him. "This will," Hollister said, his voice carrying clearly through the church's perfect acoustics, "was updated 6 months ago. Elaine Monroe requested it be read aloud in front of her family and friends immediately following her funeral service. Mark interrupted, standing up and turning to face the congregation. Always the businessman, always in control. "This isn't necessary," he said, flashing that charismatic smile that had helped him close so many deals. "We already discussed Mom's wishes." "Actually, no," Hollister said calmly, adjusting his glasses. "You discussed your assumptions. Now it's time to hear Elaine's truth." Mark's smile faltered. He glanced at Stephen, who shrugged slightly, and then both looked back at me, their expressions hardening when they saw I wasn't surprised by the notary's appearance. Did they think I had orchestrated this? The irony was that I had no idea this was coming. Hollister cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Elaine Margaret Monroe, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." He continued through the legal preamble, his voice steady and professional. I noticed several people shifting uncomfortably in their seats, probably wishing they could leave but too curious to miss what was coming. "To my son, Stephen, I leave my collection of antique watches, which he always admired, though never cared to ask about their history." Stephen's jaw tightened. The collection was valuable, certainly, but not what he had been expecting. Those watches had belonged to Dad, and they were worth several $1,000s, but nothing compared to Mom's other assets. "To my son, Mark, I leave the painting of the Oregon coast, the one he said would match his dining room. May it remind him of the things that can't be bought." Mark's face flushed red. The painting was one Mom and Dad had purchased on their honeymoon, a beautiful original that Mark had commented on during his last visit. "That would look perfect in my new house," he had said, not even trying to be subtle. Then Hollister paused. He looked up, his eyes scanning the congregation before settling on me in the back row. "And to my daughter Rachel, my caregiver, my protector, my only constant in the last decade of my life, I leave the family house, all financial assets in my name, and the remaining contents of my investment portfolio." A gasp echoed through the church. I felt lightheaded, my vision blurring slightly at the edges. This couldn't be happening. The house alone was worth nearly $1 million in today's market. And Mom's investments. Well, I had no idea how much they were worth, but I knew it was substantial. Mark stood up again, his face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. Rachel must have forced her to write that. Mom would never do this." "Rachel manipulated her," Stephen added, turning to look at me with undisguised contempt. "Mom wasn't in her right mind at the end. We'll contest this." But Mr. Hollister wasn't finished. He raised his hand for silence, and something in his demeanor made even my furious brothers pause. "Elaine anticipated this reaction," he said. "She instructed that a video message be played if her will was contested in any way, especially by her sons." From his briefcase, he pulled out a small USB drive. The church's AV system had been used for the photo montage during the service. And now Hollister walked to the control booth, spoke briefly with the technician, and handed over the drive. A projector lit up the church wall. And there she was, Mom, sitting in her favorite armchair in the living room. She looked thin, her cheeks hollow from the cancer treatments, but her eyes were clear and determined. I recognized the blue cardigan she was wearing. It was from the last good day we had together, about 5 months ago before the final decline began. "If you're watching this," Mom began, her voice stronger than it had been in months, "then my sons are accusing Rachel of manipulation. Let me be clear, Rachel saved my life. Over and over. She stayed when no one else did. She wiped my tears, not just my body. She reminded me what it meant to be seen." I was crying by then, silent tears sliding down my cheeks. I hadn't known she felt this way. In those last months, when communication became harder, I sometimes wondered if she resented me, if she wished for her sons instead of her daughter. "Mark? Stephen," Mom continued on the screen, addressing my brothers directly. "You visited 4 times in 7 years. 4 times. You called on holidays. You sent gifts. But you weren't there when I couldn't bathe myself. You weren't there when I needed to be driven to treatments. You weren't there when I was afraid of dying alone." The church was completely silent. I could feel eyes turning to look at me, reassessing everything they thought they knew about our family. Rachel gave up everything for me. Her job, her home, her chance at a family of her own. She never complained, not once, even when I was difficult, and believe me, I was often difficult. Mom smiled weakly on the screen, and I couldn't help but smile back through my tears. Yes, she had been difficult sometimes. The pain made her irritable. The medications made her confused. There were days when nothing I did was right, but I never held it against her. If love could be measured in sacrifice, Rachel gave the most. And this will is mine, not hers. She never asked for anything. In fact, she tried to talk me out of this decision. But it's mine to make. She paused, taking a labored breath, and I remembered how hard it had become for her to speak for extended periods toward the end. Mark, Stephen, I love you. I've always loved you. But you abandoned me when I needed you most, and you abandoned your sister, who took on the burden you wouldn't carry. This is not punishment. This is justice, the video ended. Everyone in the room was stunned into silence. I couldn't look at my brothers, couldn't bear to see their reactions. Instead, I stared at my hands, twisted together in my lap, wondering how I had never known that Mom had seen everything so clearly. The video, Mr. Hollister said into the silence, was recorded in my presence, with a physician present to confirm Mrs. Monroe's mental competence. There is no legal ground for contesting this will. He gathered his papers, closed his briefcase, and walked down the aisle toward the exit. As he passed my pew, he paused. She was very proud of you, he said softly, so only I could hear. Then he was gone. The service concluded awkwardly after that. People filed out, some stopping to offer me condolences for the first time that day. Others hurried past, uncomfortable with the family drama they had witnessed. My brothers left without speaking to me, their wives and children trailing behind them, casting curious glances in my direction. I remained seated until the church was empty. Then I walked to the front, to the closed casket draped with flowers, and placed my hand on the polished wood. "Thank you," I whispered. "But you didn't have to do that." I could almost hear her response. "Yes, I did. It was long overdue." After the funeral, my brothers tried to contest the will. Of course they did. They hired an expensive law firm from Portland, claiming I had coerced Mom in her final months. They demanded a mental competency evaluation be performed retroactively through interviews with her doctors and review of her medical records. I didn't hire a lawyer at first. I couldn't afford one, and besides, I was too consumed with grief to fight. The house felt empty without Mom, even though I'd been living there for years. I wandered from room to room, touching her things, remembering her in each space. The kitchen where she'd taught me to bake. The living room where we'd watched old movies together. The garden where she'd sat in the sunshine on good days, wrapped in blankets even in summer, because the chemo had left her perpetually cold. But when the court date was set, Mr. Hollister called me. "You need representation, Rachel," he said firmly. "Your brothers are serious about this." "I don't have the money for a lawyer," I admitted. "Actually, you do," he said. "Your mother's accounts transferred to you upon her death, and she set aside a specific fund for legal protection, just in case." That was when I realized that Mom hadn't just been thinking about providing for me after she was gone. She had been strategizing, preparing for every contingency. She knew her sons. She knew they would fight, and she had made sure I could fight back. The lawyer Mr. Hollister recommended was a quiet, competent woman named Diane Myers. She listened to my story, reviewed the will and the video, and nodded confidently. "They don't have a case," she said. "But they're hoping to intimidate you into a settlement. Men like your brothers often count on women like you to avoid conflict at all costs." She was right. My whole life, I had been the peacemaker, the one who gave in to keep the family harmony. But not this time. This time, I would stand firm, not just for myself, but for Mom. The day of the hearing arrived. I wore the same navy blue dress from the funeral, the one Mom liked. Mark and Stephen sat across the aisle with their lawyer, a sleek man in an expensive suit who exuded confidence. They didn't look at me, but every doctor, every nurse, every neighbor testified Elaine Monroe was of sound mind. And Rachel? She was her only visitor. The one who fed her, dressed her, and sat beside her until the end. Mrs. Monroe was more lucid and decisive in her final months than many people I see in my practice, Dr. Reynolds, Mom's oncologist, testified. She spoke often of her daughter's care and her concerns about her son's absence. "I witnessed Elaine Monroe sign her will," added Nurse Patel, who had been part of Mom's home care team. "She knew exactly what she was doing. And she told me, 'My daughter deserves this and more for all she sacrificed.'" Even Mrs. Jensen from next door, who had brought over casseroles and sat with Mom sometimes when I needed to run errands, testified. In the 7 years Rachel cared for Elaine, I saw those boys maybe 3-4 times, she said, her voice quavering with age but firm with conviction. Meanwhile, Rachel gave up everything, and Elaine knew it. The judge dismissed their claim in under an hour. The evidence clearly shows that Elaine Monroe was of sound mind when she updated her will, she stated, and the provisions she made were not unreasonable given the circumstances of her care. Petition denied. My brothers wouldn't look at me as they left the courtroom. Their wives, who had once been friendly at family gatherings before becoming increasingly distant during Mom's illness, hurried past with their eyes averted. What followed was harder to swallow, not the inheritance or the house, but the realization that my brothers never really saw me. They saw only what they wanted to see, a spinster sister who had nothing better to do than care for their mother. A woman so desperate for approval that she would manipulate a dying woman for financial gain. They couldn't conceive that I had acted out of love, that the years of care had been a choice made willingly, if not always easily. That Mom and I had developed a bond in those final years that transcended the typical mother-daughter relationship. We had become something more to each other, companions, confidants, witnesses to each other's struggles and triumphs in the face of tremendous difficulty. Mark sent a cold email weeks later. Hope you're happy. Enjoy your prize. But the prize wasn't the money. It was finally being recognized. The house felt different after the court case concluded. Legally, it was mine now, every creaking floorboard, every faded wallpaper seam, every memory embedded in its walls. But without Mom, it felt less like a home, and more like a museum of our shared past. I spent weeks sorting through her belongings, a process both therapeutic and torturous. Each item held a story. The chipped teacup she insisted on using every morning, the threadbare quilt her grandmother had made, the collection of bookmarks from every library she'd ever visited. What does one do with a lifetime of accumulated treasures when the person who treasured them is gone? Some things I kept: her favorite cashmere sweater that still smelled faintly of her perfume, the dog-eared copy of Pride and Prejudice with her notes in the margins, the turquoise earrings Dad had given her on their 20th anniversary. Others I carefully packed to donate or give away. One afternoon, while sorting through her desk, I found a small leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. Inside, in Mom's increasingly shaky handwriting, were entries dating back to when she first got sick. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder, but eventually began to read. Rachel moved back today, the first entry began. She says it's temporary, but we both know better. I hate being a burden, but I'm selfishly grateful she's here. I sank into Mom's desk chair, the journal trembling in my hands, and read entry after entry chronicling our time together. Not just her illness, but her observations about me, her worries for my future, her anger at my brother's absence. Mark called today, finally. He talked about his new boat for 20 minutes and asked about my health for 2. Does he not realize I'm dying? Or does he just not want to face it? Stephen sent flowers for Mother's Day. Rachel spent 3 hours helping me bathe and wash my hair so I'd feel human again. No contest which gift meant more. I worry about what will happen to Rachel after I'm gone. She's put her life on hold for me. She thinks I don't notice the gray in her hair, the tiredness in her eyes. She thinks I don't hear her crying in the bathroom when a treatment goes badly. My brave girl, always trying to be strong for me. And then, most revealing, talked with Greg Hollister today about changing my will. Rachel was against it, said Mark and Stephen would think she manipulated me. She doesn't want money or the house, says she just wants peace. But I've watched my sons ignore their sister's sacrifice for years. Justice may not bring peace, but silence certainly won't either. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. Mom had seen everything, not just the care I provided, but the toll it took, the loneliness, the grief that started long before she died. And she had valued it, valued me, in a way I never fully understood while she was alive. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, one of the good ones Mom had been saving for a special occasion that never came because of her medications, and sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane, my lawyer. Heard from Mark's attorney. They're not appealing. It's over. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt hollow. I had the house, the money, the legal vindication, and I had lost my family. Not just Mom, but my brothers too, such as they were. The people who shared my childhood memories, who knew what Dad's laugh had sounded like, who remembered the family vacation to Crater Lake when I was 10 and fell into the water trying to take a photo. The next morning, I woke to the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. Looking out the window, I saw Mark's black SUV parked behind my old Honda. My heart raced as I threw on a robe and hurried downstairs, uncertain whether to expect reconciliation or more conflict. I opened the door to find Mark and his oldest son, Jason, standing on the porch. Mark looked uncomfortable. Jason looked embarrassed, and between them they held the large painting of the Oregon coast, the one Mom had left to Mark in her will. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice coming out more harshly than I intended. Mark cleared his throat. "We came to get the painting. Mom left it to me, of course. Not an apology, not a peace offering, just coming to collect what he felt was rightfully his." "I know," I said, stepping back to let them in. "I was going to call you about arranging pickup for the painting and Steven's watches." They followed me into the living room, where the painting still hung above the fireplace. Mom had loved that scene of rugged cliffs and crashing waves, saying it reminded her of the trip where I had been conceived. I wondered if Mark knew that story, if he would care. "How's the family?" I asked as Mark carefully took down the painting, more to break the uncomfortable silence than out of genuine expectation of reconnection. "Fine," he said shortly. Then after a pause, "Karen's starting chemo next month. Breast cancer. Stage 2, my heart sank. Karen, Mark's wife, was only 48, just a year older than me. "I'm so sorry," I said, and meant it. "If there's anything I can do?" Mark gave a bitter laugh. "Like what? Move in with us for 7 years?" The cruelty of the comment hit me like a physical blow. Jason looked up sharply at his father, then at me, his expression horrified. "Dad," he said quietly. "Don't," but Mark wasn't finished. "You think you're so noble, Rachel. The devoted daughter. The selfless sister. But you just wanted the money all along." I stood very still, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This was what Mark truly believed, or what he needed to believe to justify his own absence, his own choices. "I didn't want the money," I said quietly. "I wanted Mom to have comfort and dignity in her final years. I wanted her to know she was loved and not alone. I wanted her to have a family who showed up for her." Mark's face flushed. "We had lives, responsibilities." "So did I interrupted, my voice still calm. "I chose Mom over those things." "You didn't. That was your right. But don't stand in Mom's house and tell me I did it for money." Mark looked like he wanted to argue further, but Jason put a hand on his arm. "Dad, let's just go." As they headed for the door, the painting awkwardly balanced between them. Jason paused and looked back at me. "I'm sorry about Grandma," he said. "And I'm sorry we weren't around more." It wasn't much, but it was something, a tiny crack in the wall of animosity, a small acknowledgement of the truth. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the empty space on the wall where the painting had been. It looked like a wound, a visible reminder of all that had been lost. I realized then that what I had received wasn't a prize to be enjoyed, but a responsibility to be honored. Mom had entrusted me with her home, her legacy, her final statement to the world. The question was, what would I do with it? 3 months after Mom's death, I was still sleeping in my old childhood bedroom, rather than the master suite that was now technically mine. I still hadn't touched Mom's closet, still hadn't changed her prescriptions taped to the refrigerator, still hadn't canceled her magazines that continued to arrive with relentless regularity. It was as if making these changes would be the final acknowledgement that she was truly gone. But one morning in late autumn, as rain lashed against the windows and the old house creaked in protest against the wind, I woke with a strange sense of purpose. I couldn't live in a shrine forever. Mom wouldn't have wanted that. I made a cup of coffee in my mug, not hers, and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. At the top, I wrote, "What now, Rachel?" For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in being Mom's caregiver. Before that, I'd been an architect with a promising career at a Seattle firm specializing in sustainable urban design. I'd had friends, hobbies, dreams of my own. Somewhere along the way, those things had receded into the background, becoming distant memories rather than active parts of my life. Now at 47, I had freedom and financial security, 2 things I hadn't had in combination for nearly a decade. I could do anything, travel, go back to school, move anywhere. The possibilities were both exhilarating and terrifying. But as I sipped my coffee, I realized I didn't want to leave Salem. This house, this town, they were part of me now. What I wanted was to transform my life, not escape it. I spent the day making calls to my former boss at the architectural firm, to the community college about refresher courses, to a therapist Dr. Reynolds had recommended for grief counseling. Baby steps toward reclaiming myself. That evening, I finally entered Mom's bedroom with purpose, armed with empty boxes and garbage bags. It was time. As I sorted through her clothes, her jewelry, her collection of hand lotions and perfumes, I found myself talking to her, seeking her approval for my decisions about what to keep, what to donate, what to discard. "You'd want someone else to use these," I said aloud, folding her practical winter sweaters into a donation box. "Maybe someone who's cold and can't afford new ones." When I reached the back of her closet, I found a large manila envelope with my name written on it in Mom's handwriting. Inside was a stack of architectural magazines issues from the past several years that featured sustainable housing designs, community planning projects, and articles about repurposing existing structures for new community needs. Paper-clipped to the front was a note. "For when you're ready to be Rachel again. Your talent shouldn't be buried with me. Love, Mom." I sat on the edge of her bed, clutching the magazines to my chest, crying for what felt like hours. Even in preparing for her death, she had been thinking about my life, not just providing for me financially, but nudging me back toward my passion. That night, I couldn't sleep. Ideas kept swirling in my mind, fragments connecting to form a whole. By morning, I had a vision. The next day, I called Mr. Hollister. "I want to create a non-profit," I told him. "I need to know what legal steps are involved." "What kind of non-profit?" he asked, the smile evident in his voice. "A community hospice center," I said, the words flowing now that I'd made the decision. "For women without caregivers. I want to call it Elaine's House." Over the next few months, the idea took shape. I worked with a local architectural firm to design renovations that would transform our family home into a small hospice facility with 6 private rooms, a communal kitchen and living area, and a peaceful garden space. I established a board of directors that included Dr. Reynolds, Nurse Patel, and surprisingly Mrs. Jensen from next door, who turned out to have a background in nonprofit management before her retirement. I didn't use the entire inheritance for the project. I set aside enough to live comfortably and to eventually restart my own architectural practice, focusing on community-centered design. But the bulk of Mom's assets went into creating Elaine's House and establishing an endowment to help sustain it. The renovation process was healing. Each decision, from the soothing color palette to the specialized medical equipment disguised as normal furniture, felt like a collaboration between Mom and me. I kept her bedroom as a private sanctuary for families to say goodbye to their loved ones, painting it her favorite shade of blue and hanging family photos on the walls. 6 months after Mom's death, as the first spring flowers were pushing through the soil in what would become the hospice garden, I received an unexpected email from Stephen. "I heard about what you're doing with the house," he wrote. "It's a good thing. Mom would be proud. No apology, no mention of our estrangement." But it was something a small olive branch extended across the chasm that had opened between us. I replied simply, "Thank you. You and your family are welcome to visit when we open in the fall." I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. But a week later, a package arrived containing Dad's antique watches, the ones Mom had left to Stephen in her will. The note inside read only, "These belong at Elaine's house. They were always meant to be passed down through the family, and now they'll be part of something lasting." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement of the past we shared, of the value in what I was creating, of the truth that Mom had seen so clearly. That love isn't measured in visits or phone calls, or even shared DNA, but in presence, in sacrifice, in showing up day after day when it's hard and thankless and heartbreaking. And sometimes, that's enough. 9 months after Mom's funeral, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning gold and crimson, Elaine's house opened its doors. The transformation was complete, from our family home to a haven for women facing their final journey without family support. The old oak tree in the front yard, the one with Dad's swing still hanging from its strongest branch, now had a small memorial plaque. In memory of Elaine and John Monroe, whose love created not just a house, but a home. I stood on the porch, greeting the small crowd that had gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The mayor was there, along with several city council members, local healthcare providers, and community members who had supported the project with donations and volunteer work. Dr. Reynolds stood beside me, his presence a steady comfort as it had been throughout Mom's illness. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered as we watched people arrive. "This is exactly what this community needed." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The journey to this moment had been exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure, navigating permits, hiring staff, establishing protocols, all while processing my own grief. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear alone. But I wasn't really alone. Mom's presence stayed with me through every decision, and the community had rallied around the vision in ways I never expected. As I prepared to make my speech, I scanned the crowd one last time, not really expecting to see familiar faces, but hoping nonetheless. And there, at the very back, almost hidden behind a large oak tree, stood Stephen. He was alone, without his wife or children, dressed in a gray suit that looked uncomfortable on his usually casual frame. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave a small, awkward nod. My heart pounded as I stepped up to the podium. The speech I had prepared suddenly seemed inadequate, too formal for what was ultimately a deeply personal endeavor. So instead, I spoke from the heart. "Welcome to Elaine's house," I began, my voice stronger than I expected. "This place exists because of one simple truth. No one should have to face the end of life alone." I told them about Mom, about her courage through illness, about her insistence on maintaining dignity even as her body failed her. I didn't mention my brothers or the will or the court case. Those weren't the parts of our story that mattered today. "My mother taught me that caregiving is both the hardest and most sacred work we can do for one another," I said. "At Elaine's house, we will create a space where that work is honored, where both patients and caregivers are supported, where the end of life is approached with compassion, dignity, and even joy when possible." After the ribbon was cut and the applause faded, people mingled in the newly renovated spaces. The common areas were bright and welcoming, with comfortable furniture arranged to encourage conversation. The patient rooms were private sanctuaries, each with a window view of either the front oak tree or the back garden. Mom's old bedroom, now called the family room, was a peaceful space for quiet conversations and final goodbyes. I was showing a group of potential donors the specialized kitchen designed to prepare meals for patients with varying dietary needs when I felt a tap on my shoulder. Turning, I found Stephen standing there, looking as uncomfortable as I'd ever seen him. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Just for a minute." We stepped out onto the back porch, away from the crowd. The garden was beautiful in its autumn colors, with mums and late-blooming roses adding splashes of color among the falling leaves. Stephen cleared his throat. "This is not what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged. "I don't know. That you'd sell the house, maybe. Move somewhere else. Buy yourself nice things, like a boat." I couldn't resist the small dig, referencing Mark's notorious purchase that had somehow been more important than visiting his dying mother. Stephen had the grace to look ashamed. "Yeah, like a boat. Or something equally useless in the grand scheme of things." He gestured at the house behind us. This matters. It's going to help people." "That's the idea," I said. He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. I wanted to give you this. For the hospice." I took it, not opening it but feeling the weight and thickness that suggested a substantial check inside. "Thank you," I said simply. "It's not enough," he replied, and we both knew he wasn't just talking about the donation. "But it's what I can do right now." As he turned to leave, I found myself calling after him. "Stephen, Mark knows about today? About the opening." I sent him an invitation. Stephen's expression told me everything I needed to know. Mark wasn't coming. He was still holding on to his anger, his sense of entitlement. His version of events where I was the villain who had manipulated our mother for financial gain. "He'll come around," Stephen said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Eventually, and if he doesn't?" I asked. Stephen looked at me for a long moment, then shrugged. "Then that's his loss, isn't it?" After everyone had gone and the new staff had finished their orientation for the day, I sat alone on the front porch swing, gently rocking back and forth as twilight settled over the neighborhood. The house behind me hummed with a new purpose, with the promise of compassion and care for those who needed it most. I thought about Mom, about how she would have loved seeing her home transformed this way. I thought about Dad, who had built this swing with his own hands so many years ago. I thought about the path that had led me here, not the one I had planned, certainly, but perhaps the one I was always meant to follow. And for the first time since Mom died, I felt completely at peace with my choices. 3 years passed. Elaine's house thrived, becoming a model for similar community-based hospice centers across the state. We had cared for more than 40 women in that time, each with her own story, her own journey, her own way of facing the inevitable. Some stayed for months, others for just days or weeks. Some had distant family who visited occasionally, others had no one but us. All were treated with dignity, respect, and love. I had moved out of the family home and into a small cottage a few blocks away, close enough to remain involved in the day-to-day operations of Elaine's house, but separate enough to reclaim some semblance of a personal life. I had returned to architecture part-time, specializing in designing spaces for end-of-life care, using what I had learned from creating Elaine's house to help others do the same in their communities. Stephen and I had established a cautious relationship, not quite close, but no longer estranged. He brought his children to volunteer at Elaine's house during school breaks, teaching them the value of service that he himself had been slow to learn. His wife, Jennifer, had joined our board of directors, bringing her expertise as an accountant to help manage our growing endowment. Mark remained distant. He had moved to California after Karen recovered from her cancer treatments, starting fresh in a new city with a new job. He sent Christmas cards with family photos, but never personal notes. He had never visited Elaine's house, never acknowledged its existence beyond that initial angry reaction to the concept. Until today, I recognized his car immediately as it pulled into the driveway of Elaine's house, the same black SUV from that day he had come to collect the painting. My heart raced as I watched from the office window, unsure what to expect from this unannounced visit. Mark emerged from the driver's side, looking older than when I'd last seen him. His hair had more gray, and he carried himself with less of the confident swagger I associated with my older brother. He stood for a moment staring up at the house, at the new sign bearing our mother's name, at the professional landscaping that had replaced Mom's more haphazard gardening efforts, at the wheelchair ramp that now provided easy access to the front porch. I met him at the door before he could ring the bell. "Mark." I said, neither a question nor a greeting, just an acknowledgement of his presence. "Rachel," he replied, equally neutral. "Then can I come in?" I stepped back, allowing him into the foyer that had been expanded to accommodate medical equipment and the occasional stretcher. The walls were now a warm sage green instead of Mom's preferred beige, and photographs of our residents, those who had given permission, lined the hallway, each with a small plaque sharing not their illness but something about their life. Margaret, former kindergarten teacher. Josephine, who raised champion roses. Betsy, who sang with Aretha Franklin once in 1967. Mark took it all in silently, his expression unreadable. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. He shook his head. "Not today. I needed to see it. To see what you did with Mom's house." I led him to the sunroom at the back of the house, now a quiet space where residents could read or simply enjoy the view of the garden. It was empty at the moment, our current residents either resting in their rooms or engaged in activities with our staff and volunteers. We sat in comfortable chairs facing the garden, where the oak tree spread its protective branches over a small patio area. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "Karen's cancer is back," he said, his voice flat. "Stage 4 this time? Metastasized to her liver and bones." The air seemed to leave the room. "Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry," he nodded, still staring out at the garden. "The doctors are talking about quality of life now, not cures. 6 months, maybe a year, with aggressive treatment." I waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted finally, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to watch someone I love die by inches. I don't know how to be what she needs." And there it was, the real reason for his visit. Not reconciliation, not curiosity about Elaine's house, but fear. The same fear I had faced with Mom, the fear of inadequacy in the face of immense suffering. "No one does at first," I said gently. "You learn as you go. You make mistakes, you forgive yourself for those mistakes, and you keep showing up day after day. Like you did with Mom." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." He turned to look at me then, really look at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "I was wrong," he said simply, "about you. About what you did for Mom. About all of it. The words I had waited so long to hear landed softly between us, neither accusatory nor defensive, just a simple acknowledgement of truth. What changed your mind? I asked. He gave a bitter laugh. Cancer has a way of clarifying things, of stripping away all the bullshit we tell ourselves to justify our choices. He paused. The first time Karen's medications made her so nauseated she couldn't stop vomiting for hours, all I could think was, Rachel did this for Mom day after day, for years. And I was ashamed. I reached across the space between our chairs and took his hand. It felt strange we hadn't touched in so long, but he didn't pull away. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, he said. I don't deserve that. It's not about deserving, I replied. It's about family. It's about moving forward instead of looking back. We talked for hours about Karen's prognosis, about treatment options, about practical matters like medical leave and insurance. I shared what I had learned during Mom's illness, not just about cancer and caregiving, but about maintaining humanity in the face of disease, about finding moments of joy amidst suffering, about the importance of honest conversations around death. As evening approached, I asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between us. What can I do to help, Mark? He looked surprised, as if he hadn't expected the offer after everything that had happened. You've done enough, he said. More than enough. For Mom, for this community. I didn't come here to ask for more. I know, I said. But I'm offering anyway. In the weeks that followed, I flew to California twice to help Mark and Karen navigate the complex world of oncology appointments, palliative care options, and advanced directive decisions. I introduced them to resources I wished I'd known about during Mom's illness. I sat with Karen while Mark took much-needed breaks, sharing stories about our childhood that made her laugh despite her pain. 6 months later, when Karen's condition deteriorated rapidly, Mark called me in the middle of the night. She wants to come to Elaine's house, he said, his voice thick with tears. She says she can't think of anywhere she'd feel safer. Within a week, we had arranged everything. Karen became our 43rd resident, moving into our largest room with a view of the garden. Mark stayed in my cottage so he could be close but still have space to process his grief. Their children came to visit, filling the house with the bittersweet energy of family saying goodbye. On Karen's final day, as the autumn leaves fell outside her window in a gentle golden rain, Mark, their children, and I gathered around her bed. Mark held her hand on one side. I supported him on the other. When she took her last breath, it was with peace and dignity, surrounded by love, exactly what Elaine's house had been created to provide. Later that evening, after the children had gone to rest and the necessary arrangements had been made, Mark and I sat on the front porch swing, gently rocking back and forth in the cool night air. Thank you, he said simply. You don't need to thank me, I replied. This is what family does. He nodded, understanding at last what I had known all along, that love isn't measured in inheritance or possessions or even in equal treatment, but in presence, in showing up, in doing the hard, beautiful work of caring for one another through life's most difficult moments. As we sat in comfortable silence, I thought about Mom and the journey her death had set me on. How her final act, that public will reading that had seemed so dramatic, so unlike her, had ultimately led not just to justice, but to healing, to transformation, to this moment of reconnection that might never have happened otherwise. Real love isn't loud. It's quiet and loyal, and sometimes it takes a will to make it heard. But once heard, it echoes through generations, teaching us how to live, how to care, how to forgive, and finally, how to let go.